everyone. Welcome to, I think, the third talk, depending on how you count it, in the monster film and lecture series. This is something that we've all been, those of us who are involved in it, been talking about and working to put together for a long time, sponsored by ACTI and the Marymount Institute. Thank you, Jose and Teresia. Really wonderful. And of course, there's more events still to come. One tomorrow with our colleagues in film, and on Saturday, the student art exhibit. And if you're a part of the LMU community, you can also watch all of the films that are have been the inspiration for these talks. And tonight's talk is not just myself, but my colleague, Dr. Bruno Kanayasu. We both teach in the drawing studio. And my name is Jane Brucker. I've been at LMU for a long time, and really excited to kind of venture into talking about our topic, mirror image, Frankenstein and the creation of the human. Each of us that were giving a talk chose a film that we felt was a nice companion film to what we would talk about. And Breno teaches a class called Visualizing Literature. The last 2 years, he's been working on the book Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and recommended we use the 1931
1818.
1931 film to the 1818 textbook, right? Thank you. And for those of you who don't know me, actually, I'm an artist and a practicing artist, and I'll be showing some of my work tonight. Not that it's so scary, but I think it's maybe it helped me to sort of segue my talk and to think about some of the more subtle ways that both the mirror and the creation of the human can look at the idea of monsters. So I'm going to go first, and then Breno will introduce himself and take it from my point forward. As I mentioned, this illustration is actually by a contemporary artist named Marcy Washington, who lives in San Francisco. But we chose this image and this title, this moment in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein for a very special reason. And that's because she presents readers with the idea of the mirror as first a very simple form of reflection, as you see the reflection of the figure in the pool here. But also from this reflection, Shelley evokes some of the most complex and also subtle elements of horror. The pivotal scene that Breno and I want to focus on is this scene in which the creature sees himself for the first time and beholds itself as a monster. A quote from the book describes the creature's encounter. "But how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool. At first, I started back, unable to believe that it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas." So the creature understands, interestingly, the concept of beauty because prior to this scene, it was witnessing the cottagers out, milling about and admiring them for their grace and their beauty, their delicate complexion. And all of a sudden, he sees himself, this frightful image, in this transparent pool. And his sense of self as good and acceptable is actually usurped by the fear and hatred his reflection conveys. In this moment, the visual logic is that love and beauty are linked, and if so, also fear and disgust. According to the French psychoanalyst and psychiatrist Jacques Lacan, when a child experiences what he calls the mirror stage, along with this newfound sense of self, there is a sense of inevitability, a preset destination bestowed upon the child through the image, and inevitably determining the child's life course. The creature's reaction, despondence and mortification, signifies not just his immediate reaction to himself, but points to a deeper feeling that in this reflective moment, he is defined by his monstrous appearance. His encounter with a reflection existing outside of himself results in his inner self-recognition as the monster in the mirror. This is one of my works, and mirrors, I've used mirrors quite a bit in my work, and I feel like mirrors in visual artworks are generally void of meaning until a figure, often the viewer, in this case, a younger me, enters its field of reflection. They are the materials whose reflective function provides meaning as part of an artist's work. In the examples that I chose for this talk, actual or implied mirrors show us not only who we are, but they show us how we think about ourselves. They do this by activating the role of the viewer who is us. They are our transparent pool. Even if they encourage only a passive gaze, it is the viewer's reflection whose participation evokes a sense of self-identity, sometimes a monstrous one. Mirrors confront, they fragment, they distort, and they create illusions, disappearances, and yes, sometimes fear and horror. The first time I used mirrors in my work, I was 30, and I had just finished a difficult personal relationship and a master's degree study in religion and the arts at the Claremont School of Theology. I happened actually to be in one of the first classes in women's studies and religion. I created this pair of mirrors as part of a larger set of objects that were traditional to a hope chest, which is actually a play on words for the character of Hagar from the Hebrew Bible. The project was exhibited as part of this larger installation, and it provided an exegesis to the whole story from the Abraham narrative. In this story, if you're not familiar with it, Hagar's oppression is all too familiar. We see her representing those whose power and selfhood is denied because of nationality, because of race, class, and gender. Tragically, Hagar is powerless because God supports Sarah and Abraham. Hagar was a handmaiden to Sarah. And even when she flees to the wilderness, she has difficulty naming herself. She cannot self-identify. She cannot see herself, even when an angel, a messenger angel, prompts her to do so. Like Hagar, my own struggle had me questioning experiences of faith and femininity in both of these mirrors. Etched into the metal plates on the two mirrors, one magnified in order to take a closer look, are the words maiden, spelled M-A-I-D-E-N, which represents Hagar as a young woman and also as a handmaid. And as an aside, I was also working as a maid, putting myself through school at this time. So there was a lot of connection there. And also on the other mirror, made in, spelled M-A-D-E space, I-N, as in made in the image of God. In this 1969 performance work titled Mirror Piece 1 by American visual artist and video pioneer Joan Jonas, we see Jonas using the mirror to confront the viewer's sense of the feminine. But this time she does so by reflecting and fracturing the viewer's gaze. Mirror Piece 1 features Jonas and 15 female dancers carrying oblong mirrors, as you see here, and slowly creating choreographed movements before the audience, who you can see are sitting on the grass. In this work, there is no narrative structure, only the mere reflection of the performers' bodies, the audience watching, and the landscape surroundings. The performer's job is to capture the audience's gaze, distracting them with their own vanity and forcing them to confront themselves looking. This is a piece, an image from that same work. And like Victor Frankenstein, Jonas, the creative, plays an active role in a work for which she, in the end, has very little control over. By integrating, doubling, and segmenting the female body with mirrors, she fragments our sense of human and female wholeness and highlights the slippery role image plays in identity and spectatorship. In this photograph, which is fairly rare, owned by the Guggenheim actually, and taken by the artist, it is a single performer who sits in the grass holding a mirror, replicating her body into an uncanny being. In visual arts, using a mirror to create an illusion is often employed as a reference to a person, as in a portrait or self-portrait. In the drawing studio, we use mirrors all the time, or to imply a larger room or space, often beyond the canvas, or simply as a physical material. In Adad Hanna's work, All is Vanity, mirrorless version, which you see here on the right, the mirror functions in all of these ways, and yet Hanna's mirror is not what it seems. In this work, the artist creates an illusion within an illusion. What you're actually looking at is a pair of identical twins who perform a tableau vivant in order to create the illusion of a mirror where there is none. Let me talk first about the image on the left, which is the source that inspired Hanna's work. This inspiration is an illusionistic image made in 1892 by a young illustrator named Charles Allen Gilbert. Gilbert's drawing is also entitled All is Vanity. Perhaps you have seen this still famous image, still fairly popular, that depicts a young woman. She's surrounded by these perfume bottles and makeup. She's gazing at her reflection in the oval mirror of this vanity that she sits at. But you might know and already see that this work is what is known as a reversible figure or bistable image. It's something that we call a Gestalt Switch. And what that means is you have these two different but equally stable perceptions, and those are created, seen, and remembered by our brain. This image can be understood then, not just as a young woman at a dressing table, but also as a giant human skull. Can you see it? The giant skull reminds us that beauty, health, and riches will not last. It is a mirror that invites us to glimpse the disappearance of youth and the inevitable evil of old age and death. In Hanna's version of All is Vanity, the image we see is itself a duplication. We have the two twins, but this time without the mirror. Eventually, his piece became a high-definition video version, and the oval of the vanity mirror is empty, where those twins perform both the women and her reflection. Look carefully and watch in this next image. The installation is made into a vertical video on a plasma screen with an 11-minute, 46-second continuous shot. The twins remain perfectly still during the shot so that only their blinking and their breathing become evidence of time passing. Like Jonas, the mirror or the illusion of reflection reminds viewers of their own frail physical existence. A constant, albeit sometimes subtle monster that exists within a surreal flux of space or time. In this work of mine called The Persistence of Memory, I used a mirror, my own mirror actually, that hung for many years above my vanity to draw on the same idea. In this work, I quote Salvador Dali's melting clocks in sterling silver droplets and tiny puddles dripping onto the wall. I use these elements to represent my memory and my self-image. Precious as is the metal I used to make them, easily tarnished and seemingly melting away. The twin monsters of memory and self, prompting my own disappearance. There you see a detail of the sterling silver puddles. Here's photographer Cindy Sherman's version of vanity, depicted using a hand mirror, always illusionistic. Sherman treats each photograph as a portrait, as her own constructed image becomes a mirror to reflect our frightening fears and obsessions. Most often, Sherman transforms herself using movie-like makeup and costume into a litany of characters, historical and fictional, that cross lines of gender, age, and culture in an attempt to define what is human. These slides show examples of her socialites, each confrontational as the eyes are turned toward the viewer, meeting our gaze, and allowing her to exaggerate her subject, monstrous in their illusion of truth. What Sherman wants for us is to confront the pain and fear of looking. And for our discussion, it is interesting to note that she's particularly attracted to traditional horror as a way for her to confront her own deepest, darkest fears. She notes, "My biggest fear is a horrible, horrible death. And I think this fascination with the grotesque and with horror is a way to prepare yourself physically if, God forbid, you have to experience something like that." In 2005, I made a piece for my mother to help her confront just this kind of terrifying death. Only weeks after her open heart surgery, my mother's recovery was reversed by being diagnosed with a very disfiguring form of cancer. My mother had always enjoyed clothing, jewelry, and her looks. In fact, sometimes the doctors really didn't understand that she was in great pain because she always seemed very pulled together and always very calm. So to honor her life, rather than her looks, I created a set of hand mirrors for her, replacing the looking glass with polished wood to show that age, through its notated rings, burls, and marks, is something that we earn. Here's a detail. I would like to talk next about Louise Bourgeois, an artist known for her powerful emotional works that relate to her childhood, her womanhood, and her body, including its parts, and for her monstrous, oversized sculptures of spiders. This work, called Cells, Eyes and Mirrors, is one of a series of large works constructed over 20 years. For Bourgeois, the series of works represents different types of pain: the physical, the emotional and psychological, and the mental and intellectual. When does the emotional become physical? When does the physical become emotional? Bourgeois says it's a circle going around and around. Pain can begin at any point and turn in any direction. Her use of mirrors allows for this multi-directional experience, playing with aspects of looking into, but not entering, the space. She reveals aspects of the interior less easily seen from the outside, as these mirrors are angled in various strategic ways. This cell that you're looking at has the structure of a cube, though is reminiscent of rooms for isolation and punishment. The ceiling and the two walls are made of this woven iron mesh, and the other two walls consist of iron rods welded to fit large square panes of glass with several spaces in the grid empty of glass. So there's panes that you can see through easily and panes which prevent your clear vision. At its center is this large pair of eyes comprising two polished black marble eyeballs, and they stare out of this lump of grayish stone. These large-scale eyeballs convey an intense force and remind me of the Darth Vader and praying mantis eyes that Dr. Wasser showed in his talk on fear on Monday night. There you can see the eyes a little bit closer, and the mirrors as they're reflecting aspects of the eyes. The black marble eyeballs are surrounded by mirrors of all these varying sizes, and on their reverse are carved breast-like bulges that are visible through the reflection in the mirror. You see that especially in this example on the left. Several small mirrors hang off the mesh wall. A large oval mirror and a smaller round mirror are mounted onto the tall, old-fashioned wood and metal stands, and those are positioned on either side of the eyes, always reflecting the audience. The need and desire to look and the ambiguities of gender, safety, and viewpoint complicate the act of looking and perceiving in these works. For Bourgeois, mirrors provide a concrete representation of the challenging dynamics involved in seeing. As she comments, reality changes with each new angle. Mirrors can be seen as a vanity, but that is not all their meaning. The act of looking into a mirror is really about having the courage it takes to look at yourself and really face yourself. As Bourgeois describes, the difficult task of facing yourself is as challenging and complicated for us as it was for Frankenstein's monster. This image depicts two compacts that I made to think about this idea and to represent the struggle to see past superficial aspects of our human preoccupation with how we look. And with that, I would like to end with a recommendation to watch two other examples of the superficial and the monstrous. In the 1967 short film, The Perfect Human, which you see on the left, by Danish filmmaker Jørgen Leith, the 2017 shot-by-shot, and the 2017, which you see on the right, shot-by-shot video remake of Leith's film by Alex de Corta called Slow Graffiti. In Slow Graffiti, de Corte literally recreates Frankenstein's monster by duplicating the skin, the hair, body, and makeup of the actor Boris Karloff in the 1931 film, with some added extra shots. I'm going to turn it over to you, Bruno. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jane, once again. My talk, like Jane's, revolves around the idea of the mirror. We share the same title. We also share the centrality of the mirror scene in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as we organized our talks. And I would like to start by calling your attention to this photo on the screen. This is taken from a relatively recent theatrical production of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to the British stage. In this production, organized by the National Theatre, the Royal National Theatre in 2011, Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller share the stage as Victor Frankenstein and the creature. But you will notice something strange about this picture, something perhaps surprising. Who is who? Who is Victor Frankenstein? Who is the creator? And who is the creature in this image? The answer, the actual answer, is that both are both of them. The mise-en-scène, the staging of the play, alternated the roles of the two characters. In some nights, Benedict Cumberbatch would play the role of the creature, and Johnny Lee Miller would be Victor Frankenstein, the creator. And on a different night, the roles would be reversed. In a sense, they were like mirror images of each other. Reversal was the dynamic at work in the way they interpret the roles. And of course, when I say reversal, it's important to note that this is not simply repetition. This is not simply a reversed identity. There were differences in the performances. They are different actors, different people. And even though the script was broadly the same, you can tell those differences. You can tell that different bodies are embodying the same yet different characters when they play each of the roles. This ambiguity this reversal with a difference, or this repetition with a difference, is at the heart of the idea that generated this event you are all participating in, the series of lectures and film screenings. The image we chose to be displayed on the flyers and the posters for the event, as you know, you've all heard already, is Francisco de Goya's Capriccio number 43. And the reason why we chose this particular image, besides, of course, the explicit reference to monsters, is that at the very heart, the very core of this image, there is a grounding ambiguity. The Spanish that gives the informal popular title to the image can be read in two different, complementary, but also contradictory ways. On the one hand, for those of you who speak Spanish, you will immediately tell, on the one hand, this title could be translated to English as the sleep of reason produces monsters, creates monsters, the sleep of reason, right? Sueño as sleep. And of course, this translation of this title leads to a reading that is very persuasive, that fits the context. The image was published around 1797, right? The heyday of the age of reason, right? The age of the Enlightenment. The sleep of reason produces monster. That is to say, when reason is asleep, we better be careful. Dangerous, terrible things lurk in the shadows, and we need the light of reason to keep them at bay. But the same expression can be translated differently. Sueño in Spanish means not only dream, but also, not only sleep, but also dream, right? This expression could be also translated as the dream of reason produces monster. And then the question we ask changes radically. What is it that reason can dream that can be so monstrous? What is the limit? Are there limits to the dreams of reason? Is there a price to pay for what reason can dream? Is there a dark side to the age of light, to the age of enlightenment? The interesting thing, however, is not that we have two different readings, but that they coexist. They share the same space and time in the image. You cannot decide between one or the other. In English, we have to resort to succession, right? This or that, right? We spread it out in time to make sense of it. But in the Spanish, in the original Spanish, both exist at the same time. It is one and the other, and they're not compatible, right? Do we want reason to be awake against the monsters that otherwise could take over? Or is it the fact that reason, when it is wide awake, creates those very monsters? It is undecidable, but that ambiguity, that paradox, that breaks again, that goes against a certain classical logic, that paradox is real. And it is this reality that is the matrix of the horror, right? From which a work like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein takes its force. When we look at the early editions of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, we will soon see that the work has two titles, right? A title and a subtitle, though the "or" here gives us a similar ambiguous motion as we had when looking at Goya's work. It's not a title necessarily and a subtitle. There's no clear hierarchy in that sense. It is Frankenstein, or it is the modern Prometheus, right? We could say. This ambiguity then opens the book, right? Meets the reader in the face the moment the reader holds the volume in her hands. But there is more ambiguity to this still. If we look at the reference to Prometheus, the modern Prometheus, right? If you look at the reference here, right? We know the story of Prometheus, right? The mythological, being, the Titan, right? That brought fire to humanity, right? And made civilization possible, but was punished by Zeus and the Olympians for that act of kindness. He loved man, right? And he shared what he should not have shared, according to the gods, with men. He made civilization possible, but he paid the price for it. This is one version of the myth of Prometheus, maybe the best known version, right? And of course, this version resonates with ambiguity in Goya's piece. There's something dangerous about reason, right? The driving force of civilization. There's something two-faced about it, right? One can think of the fact that as Walter Benjamin once famously said, right? Every document of civilization is a document of barbarism, right? There is a price, a human price to be paid for every step forward we take, right? But there's a second story, a second version to the myth of Prometheus. In that version, Prometheus was punished by the gods, but his act of hubris was not sharing fire and making civilization possible. It was, so to speak, more creative. Prometheus created man out of clay. It was an artistic, genetic act, an act of Genesis, right? He created man out of clay. And when, of course, we look at this version of the story, we immediately see the resemblance, the connections between the story of Prometheus and the story of Victor Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the ambitious, brilliant student / scientist who decided to create a human being. Or was it? I called it a human being, but the novel goes to great lengths to avoid calling the creature a human being. When the creature first appears in the novel, when the narrator of the novel first catches sight of it in the Arctic, he refers to the creature as something of human shape, gigantic in stature, of human shape. Most of the time, the creature is referred to by Victor, who is one of the narrators of the story, one of the key narrators of the story, as a monster, a fiend, a demon, a wretch, and sometimes the creature. The creature has no name. When we look at the name Frankenstein, we think of the creature, of the monster. But of course, Frankenstein is the creator's name, not the creature's. Of course, we can also ask the question, what is modern about this Prometheus? Well, we can connect some dots in here, right? In the traditional mythical Prometheus, it is a god, a titan, an older generation of divine beings that dare to create man. In the modern Prometheus, Shelley's Frankenstein, man is both creature and creator. And what man creates is now one of the points of contention of the book, right? What is that? Now, human-shaped being that is created, right? Man, creator, and creature. Keep track of that ambiguity, right? That grounding ambiguity. Now, let me stay here for 1 second more. Shelley's book, Mary Shelley's book, was published in 1818. But the story that we read about, the story of Frankenstein, of Victor Frankenstein and his creation, the story that Victor tells to this ambitious captain in the Arctic, and the story that this captain, Robert Walton, will tell by means of letters to his sister, the story that we catch a glimpse of looking over his shoulder or her shoulders. We don't know how we get access to those letters as readers. That story is dated somewhat ambiguously to the 1700s. And if we triangulate a little bit, if we take into account the fact that Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is quoted directly in the letters, we could say that this story actually takes place in the late 1700s. Why would Mary Shelley go out of her way to situate that story, published in 1818, later revised in 1831, in the late 1700s? Why should that matter? My suggestion, my theory, is that she wanted to place that story about monstrosity, about the encounter of man with an other. She wanted to treat that story at the height of the Age of Reason, right? Late 1700s. We already made some connections here when talking about Goya. But to go a little more in depth in here, the 1700s was quite literally one of the pivotal moments in which the notion of the modern human being, or in the gendered language of the time, the modern man, was created, was invented. We know that in 1789, the French Revolution took place. And we know that in that same year, a very important document was published, right? The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And in that document, for the very first time in history, individuals, men, human beings, and I will talk a little bit more about those distinctions in a moment, were seen as subjects endowed with rights, rights that were seen as natural. You were born with those rights, and therefore those rights, they could not be eradicated from you. They were imprescriptible. They were natural. Those rights, the rights of liberty, the rights to liberty, property, safety, resistance against oppression. Before that document, people, individuals, had duties, not rights. When studying the history of law, you learn that rights, individual rights, are a very recent invention. So it is only fitting that this story that we think of as the story of a monster coincides in time with the creation of the modern right-endowed man, the modern right-endowed human being. Now, things are complicated though, right? Because, and it is because they are complicated, right, that it is so interesting that Shelley's novel is situated in this time. At the same, when the Declaration was published, right, when France became this seat of enlightened ideas, of revolutionary ideas that did away with birthright privilege and gave centrality to the law, the rule of law, to hard work, right? All that theory that we still subscribe to. When this happened, contradictions became visible. At the same time as the French Revolution was taking place and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen was circulating, France had the most profitable colony in the New World. Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti, was French possession and remained so for quite a few years after the document circulated. But the document did circulate, and in fact, it reached Saint-Domingue, right, present-day Haiti. And a response came from people who were influenced by that new invention, the invention of man in 1792, and a few years later, right? The leaders of the revolts, the slave revolts in what is now Haiti, they wrote to the French people. They wrote to them, and using their arguments, they pointed to those contradictions, right? I won't read it to you, but we can take a glimpse of it. We can take a look at some of the motions, the logical motions that can be witnessed here, right? The subjects writing this letter, right? They define themselves as men. And perhaps we can read men here as human beings. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We are a class of men whom up to the present you have failed to recognize as like unto you. You, the creators of the document. We have here, again, that tension, right? Because that document was written by people, and that document created new political subjects. So we have again here creature and creator in some literal sense, right? So even though we are men, and even though we are not very eloquent, we don't know how to choose big words, right? We're going to show you the contradictions that are opened up, are made possible by the new logical order that the document created, right? These men are those whom you call your slaves, but we, who are men, claim the rights to which all men may aspire, right? So again, that grounding ambiguity, reason as that which dreams monster, but reason that needs to be awake so that monsters won't haunt us. Mary Shelley had illustrious fathers, illustrious parents. William Godwin was her father, anarchist philosopher. Mary Wollstonecraft, one of the earliest feminists, was her mother. And Mary Wollstonecraft, who died only a few days after Shelley was born, she was writing, she was active, she was participating as an engaged intellectual in those years when the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen was published. She was one of the very first to defend it. She wrote the book by which she became known initially, A Vindication of the Rights of Man, in response to Edmund Burke's conservative critique of that very declaration and of the French Revolution in general. Right? She defended the universality of those rights. She defended the people that would receive those rights as opposed to the privilege of a few. Very soon, however, she became aware of a set of contradictions, of some limitations of that document. And less than 2 years after publishing her Vindication of the Rights of Man, she published another book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. She realized that that invention of this political subject, this political being, man endowed with rights, this invention created a At the same time, not only those who were entitled to these rights, but also those who were not. That gesture of inclusion was at the same time a gesture of exclusion. She began to highlight again that grounding ambiguity, right? Light and dark, they are mutually independent. Light illuminates our way, but it also casts shadows on that very way. In her vindication of the rights of woman, she was critical of this exclusive or exclusivist usage of the word man. The fact that even though those rights were natural, even though man was sometimes rhetorically used to mean human beings, well, that was not in practice always the case, right? So there was this attention here to the motions of exclusion behind this rhetoric of inclusion that characterized the age. So that leads us to a broader question. Man, I'm talking about the invention of man or the human being, and I'm using the gendered language here on purpose, in part as a provocation, in part to echo the usage of the time. Man, what is man? Who am I? What am I? This is one of the central questions in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is one of the questions questions asked both by Victor Frankenstein, as he tells Robert Walton his story, but also, of course, by the creature. At one point, in the second volume of the novel, the creature will speak. The creature will tell us, the readers, his story. The creature would tell Victor Frankenstein, his creator, his story. And the creature will do that in the most eloquent way. In fact, the creature, we could argue, is one of the most, if not the most eloquent character in the book. Unlike most of the adaptations of Shelley's Frankenstein, right? So this monster speaks well, is articulate, right? And that poses a problem because, wait a minute, what is a monster? How do we understand what a monster is? We oppose it to who we are, right? To the human. The human is not the monster, and the monster is the non-human. That's the way the logic works. But then if we look at the way we have defined what a human being is, if we go back, say, to Aristotle, right, who defined man as the rational animal, as the usual translation goes. Was the creature rational? We could argue that he was. But let's look a little more in depth in here, right? This is a translation that we inherit from the Latin, but the Greek word that Aristotle uses here is, on the one hand, it's not animal, right? Zoon, as in zoo, the zoo, refers to beings that are alive or living beings. A little broader than animal, perhaps, unless we go back to Latin and, of course, break down the word animal, anima, and so on, which we won't do here. But what is the distinguishing feature of this living being? Aristotle says it is the logos. Here's the word logon. This animal has logos. And what is logos? Logos could be translated as reason. It has been. Now, that's one of the classical translations, right? We are rational animals. But logos can also be understood as speech, as language, as discourse, as being able to articulate meaning out of sounds. The creature learns to speak. The creature learns to speak well in the novel. The creature, in fact, is able to tell Victor his story by emphasizing speech. Victor judges the creature too quickly by the way it looks. The creature, knowing that, insists, hear me, listen to my tale. The creature opposes sight to the word, to logos, to discourse. The creature seems to check all the boxes of the traditional definition of what a man, a human being is. A being, a living being with logos, with speech, with reason. So what happens to the boundaries between man and its other? The human being and the monster. How do we understand that? Are we back to the grounded ambiguity again? Who is the creator? Who is the creature? An important sequence of events in the novel is the education of Frankenstein's creature, how he learns how to read, how to speak, how to express himself, how to think, right? We could say that in many ways, in some ways at least, Shelley's Frankenstein is a Bildungsroman, right? A novel of formation, of education. But the creature's education is also the creature's downfall, right? Knowledge hurts. Knowledge is painful because the creature becomes aware that he is a monster. We've heard this narrative before, knowledge that leads to shame, right? It's not unique, it's not original, but there is another sense in which Shelley's Frankenstein could be said to be a Bildungsroman. If we look at the German word in here, right, Bildung, which means education, most dictionaries will list it as education, formation. The word Bild is part of that word, right? Bild is a word for image in German, for sign, for representation, right? That is the constellation of meaning in there. In that literal sense, right, going against the grain of idiomatic German and going back to the very word, in that sense, we could say that Shelley's Frankenstein is a novel about sight, about the visual, about the way one looks. Victor Frankenstein is so quick in many moments of the novel to judge people, not only the creature, by the way they look, right? Physiognomy, right, was considered a science back then, and Victor subscribed to it. So the way one looks, right, the realm of appearances is central to this novel. And it was, of course, mainstream at Shelley's time. But she opposes that tendency with this emphasis on the word, on speech, on being able to convince the other. There is this argumentative dimension to Shelley's book that makes it, in a literal way, revolutionary, right? This creature that is judged by the way it looks. In this novel that is mostly about appearances, it is a monster because it looks monstrous. This creature is eloquent. This creature checks the definition of man. All right. We arrive then at the defining moment, the moment that intersects man and monster, the moment that intersects the creature, that checks the box that defines what a human being is, and the creature's realization that it is a monster, right? This is when the passage that Jane's already spent some time on, when the creature sees its own image on a mirror, on a pool of water, right? Notice that in Marcy Washington's illustration, the person who looks and the person who is seeing, they are different. Notice the closed eyes of the looker, interesting inversion, the open eyes of the one looked upon. Notice the beautiful face. Notice the more obvious scars, the open mouth with the missing teeth, right? The monstrous appearance and the humanized appearance of the onlooker, right? In a sense, this is, of course, reminiscent of another myth, that of Narcissus. But the creature is not Narcissus. The creature doesn't fall in love with his reflection. The creature is repelled by it. This is not the birth of the creature's self as a person, as a well-rounded, whole individual. When the creature looks at his image, it doesn't see a whole individual. It sees a patchwork creature made of disparate parts that don't quite fit well together. Instead of coming together, instead of witnessing the formation, right, of the creature's eye, that moment of recognition, we have a moment of abhorrence, of repulsion, right? The creature is the anti-Narcissus, the opposite, right? Tension, the anti-Narcissus. And here we have the Narcissus by Caravaggio, but I flipped it. So things are inverted. And this little journey that we're taking here, reflecting on these ambiguities, these grounding ambiguities, they take us back to the origin, to the opening of the talk. But we're not back to the same place. We are back with a difference. This is not repetition. The mirror doesn't show us an image identical to ourselves. There is reversal, but there's more than reversal. The image in the mirror that looks so much like us, reversed, conceals important differences. It is an optical illusion. It gives us the illusion of symmetry. It also gives us the illusion that what we're looking at is just like us, just like who we are. That's not exactly the case. In fact, the mirror distorts, as Jane emphasized. The mirror is at the same time reflection and refraction. A simple experiment can be performed. We won't perform it here, but you could try it yourselves at home later. You look at yourself in the mirror and you think you see your face. Let's say you're looking at yourself frontally, you see your face on a 1-to-1 scale. That's an illusion. In fact, the image that you see in the mirror is about half the size of your actual head, and that can be easily measured. And yet, it doesn't seem that way, right? So that symmetry is, in an important way, an illusion, right? Now, to pull some things together and arrive at something that looks like a conclusion, I want to put on the table, again, the importance of ambiguity with a difference. I also want to remind ourselves that in the novel Frankenstein, we have many stories within stories. We have a broader frame narrative, the brother that is writing letters to his sister. We have Victor Frankenstein's story. Victor Frankenstein tells his story to the brother, to Robert Walton. And within Victor's story, we have the creature's account of events. The moment the creature meets Victor, demands that Victor listen. And his argument, one of many, is no one is guilty before the law without having the opportunity to defend himself. The creature is almost quoting textually the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. After all, it checks all the boxes. The creature then tells his story to Victor. And of course, the creature's story is about the same events that Victor's story is about. And yet they are not the same story, right? The point of view changes. the perspective changes, the way one looks at things, the angle from which one looks at things changes. And that change is everything. In a sense, we could read Mary Shelley's novel beyond being a classic genre founding Gothic horror novel. It's also a novel about social inclusion and exclusion. It's also a novel about the different parties making their case. There is a legal rationality to it. We have these multiplicity of points of view there, and they're all debating. They're all in a contest to define what happened, what is right, what is wrong, what is fair, what is unfair. Justice is a very important matter in the novel. But here's the thing, as I said a few times, and that's an important point, that's why I'm emphasizing it, symmetry is an illusion. We're back in the beginning, but not really. Notice that the mirror image here is no longer symmetrical. Why is this? Well, symmetry is an illusion. Reflection is also refraction. The man mirrors the monster. They are doppelgangers. They are doubles. But they are not simply the reverse image of each other. One point of view and the other point of view, they are coming from different places, from different angles. Better than symmetry as a metaphor for the mirror image, for this ambiguity, perhaps we could think of anamorphosis. This reflection comes from a different place, from a different angle, from a different point of view. From which angle does the distorted image look right? We know Hans Holbein's famous painting, The Ambassadors, right? And we know, for those of us who have seen it in person or who have had enough time to play in front of a digital reproduction of it on the internet, if we go sideways extremely to the side of the painting and look with the corner of our eyes, maybe we can see this straight image. Well, in the little distortion that I made here on Photoshop, things are not so simple. We would have to really try hard to find the right angle, the right combination of vanishing points that would properly render this image just right, that would straighten this distortion, right? Where should we situate ourselves to see this version of events the way that looks familiar to us? I don't know, right? I don't know. But there is a point in space. There is a place of enunciation that would make it possible. I just don't know which one it is. But if we were fortunate enough, after a long period of trial and error, to find that angle, to discover that exact combination of vanishing points, to make it just right, after this journey, what would words such as right, proper, straight, natural, correct, good, bad, what would these words with which we started the journey, what would those words mean after the journey? What would those words mean once we are able to leave our point of view and inhabit, even for just a second, the point of view of this incommensurable other? The words, you could use them. You could use the same words, but their context would change. And with them, perhaps their meaning would too. Now, this is not to say that these words, these very important words, right, good, natural, proper, they cease to mean anything and anything goes. No, this is not to say that. This is, however, to say that the question, what would they mean from these different angles? That question deserves to be considered. This, the importance of the place from which we speak. To whom are we speaking? Where are we coming from? This, among many other things, is one of the key lessons that Mary Shelley's novel, more than just a horror novel, can teach us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Breno and Jane, for this insightful presentation, full of layers, and it's really, really very interesting. And I hope that our audience is interested in raising some questions. Please raise your hand, or you can actually type it into the chat, and I can, so we can have like some sort of order in the way that we communicate our ideas to Jane and Breno. Okay, so I will start. There's this image of the Titan with Prometheus as a Titan molding man as clay. And I was actually reading the other day about the etymology of technology and what technology means. And I think that is the moment of the appearance of technology in history, right? In terms of its mythological power. And one of the translations of techne is to weave. And it resonates in so many ways with Frankenstein, because if I have one idea when I actually watched James Whale classical Frankenstein, that it actually holds for many years this image of me of what Frankenstein, the creature, represents, is the stitching of the parts coming together. So there is like this thing of how do you create something, and how do you allow yourself to create something that eventually you will breathe life into. So flesh is necessary, the form is necessary, but then still you need the elan vital, the energy that triggers the motion of the flesh. And in the case of Frankenstein, it's electricity. And with all what you were talking in terms of the Age of Enlightenment, electricity became, which is also associated with Benjamin Franklin, as the source of what at that moment in time was a phenomenal force that we have to deal with, and that actually created this relation with the sciences. So my question to you is, how do you see this idea of technology as weaving, and the idea of electricity in terms of this opus magna, of this like masterpiece?
I think electricity is an apt metaphor for the age and for what reason, and technology can do. Electricity is fascinating. It is mesmerizing. It is also destructive, right? It moves things and it annihilates things, right? So it embodies that ambiguity I was talking about very, very well. Electricity, of course, also going back to the age, is one of the embodiments of the sublime, right? The sublime in nature that is present everywhere in Mary Shelley's novel, that of course was in people's mind, right? Edmund Burke, writing about the French Revolution, also a few years earlier had written about the sublime which puts people in their place, right? The sublime is that which is so big that makes us small, and yet it attracts us, right? So there's a tension here between nature and an age, the age of reason, in which we want control over nature, right? I didn't mention in my talk, I was already running a bit late, but there is a beautiful contradiction in the expression natural rights, because it is the age of the social revolutions and social conquests, right? And the rights are being put in writing for the first time, but they're being put in right at the first time, but they're being put in writing as if they were natural, right? That tension then becomes some kind of conflation. Now, technology, the word technology is also a metaphor, right? The word technology, techne as weaving, but also techne as craft, as art, right? Together with logos, reason, speech, thinking about it, right? The science of art, as it were. we live in a time that tends to pit art against science, but technology almost suggests that they overlap, right? And Prometheus in that painting is an artisan.
And for you, Jane, I think the question is that for you, weaving is a very important concept in your personal work. What do you see in terms of weaving, the mirror, the Frankenstein?
Well, I mean, I didn't show that part of my work that has to do with not actually putting things together, but taking things apart, right? Having things sort of fall apart. And, I'm not sure we would call Frankenstein the monster, at least the one that most of us hold in our head, which is probably from a vision from the movie rather than the book, but, as necessarily the most well-crafted of creatures, right? We think of, the scars are so evident, and the limbs are maybe not quite as articulated as they might be, or the suit is not tailored quite right. And so I think that it's interesting, despite all of that, that we still end up with a creature who is full of life, and who is full of emotions, and full in a very not just as a little spark, but more like a lightning bolt. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, Jose, but what I found was interesting when I tried to I just knew I wanted to work with artists who actually used a physical mirror, right? Or who were implying a mirror, and looking at all the ways those mirrors were used was fascinating, and artists were incredibly facile with that. And so for me, just putting that reflection together was very much like weaving the way in which artists have been innovative and creative, and not always, and I can speak from personal experience, sometimes you do things and you don't always know what you do. And I think that that's another kind of theme that comes out of these incredible powers like technology. We're in this situation now. Is it for good or ill? Or what do we do with it? Right? And how do we control what we do, the outcome of what we do with it? And so I think that's both a problem of craft, like putting the creature together in a powerful, solid, functional way, and also, I don't know, maybe an issue of maybe luck.
Excellent. We have a question from Peter Gellerman. Do we know why the movies and the book differ so much?
That's a great question.
Really good.
Let me hazard a guess. How would we react to a creature that was the most eloquent character on the screen? What do we expect to find when we go to the theater, or when we rent a DVD titled Frankenstein, right? What kind of movie is it, right? So I think there's a tension between what we expect and what the book gives us. And that's why I think the book is so thought-provoking, right? Most of the adaptations have tried to draw a clear line between monster and the man, right? In most adaptations, the creature is can't really speak, right? It makes noises. It is pathetic, right? So there is empathy in there. There's a pitiful aspect to it, but it can't speak. So it doesn't overlap in that particular sense with Victor Frankenstein. Some modern adaptations, they play that complication up a little more, right? But they take shortcuts. For instance, I know of no adaptation, and that staging by the National Theatre that I just mentioned doesn't do it, that really has the creature learn to speak the way it does in the book. It's not believable. But then again, maybe part of the problem is what we believe in, what is believable to us.
Very good. Go ahead, Tariku. Hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly your name. Tariku has a question.
You did it right. So this, I mean, this is really a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you. My question is for both of you. If you could, I would like, because there is an element of creation and what we talked earlier about technology and in various creation myth. If we take the Christian creation myth, there is man coming into being, but also there is the failure or maybe the monstrosity or maybe the sin came because there is some technology employed, and that technology being language. It is language that kind of created the communication before language and after, because the moment humans, the way we interact with doing things or learning, there is some weaving happening in our mind, right? There is some nerve connections happening. The moment I learn writing, am I the same person after I learned? Or can I really revert back to the person that I was before learning writing? I am already a monster, or I'm already changed in some ways because some technology has become part of me. Reading is the same. So there is this question that he asks about who he is or what he is immediately around the time where he is exposed to reading, and also especially after he read the books that he found in the woods. That's where he starts asking that question, who am I, and those other questions. So my question is, how do you see Frankenstein and also technology, the idea of reading that was raised before, that being something that the moment, the creator, the creation, whoever that is engaged with technology, there is no reversion. I mean, you cannot go back. So if you could comment on the creation myth, the various creation myths, and then the parallel that we see in the Frankenstein in the book.
Yeah, I'll answer that first. I love that in all of these contexts, the fundamental question, who am I? Where am I going? Where do I come from? Those are the questions Hagar was asking of herself in the wilderness. Where was home? These are powerful questions of identity. And I think, on the one hand, it's asking those questions, and it's on the other hand, it's really how, it's the call and the response. It's the answer. How do we answer those questions? That's the journey we're all on, right? And what language do we use? I mean, do we use language? Do we use visual language? How does that language answer those questions, or how can we respond to that question differently when we're drawing than when we're writing, or than when we're singing, or when we're talking in our head to ourselves, as opposed to talking to someone else across the planet. I think that it's just really interesting to me that these questions of identity are so much a part of such a range of works, throughout time, and that we're still thinking that somehow technology, it does help us with the answer. It does change the way we think, but essentially the question is the same, and it's us who we are called to answer it, and to answer it genuinely and with integrity and with with a sense of reflection, if I can get back to the idea of the mirror.
I'll just very briefly say that these, so Tariq, you put together stories of creation, right, and technology, right? And maybe I can be a little broad here and understand technology as a form of knowledge, right? Mastery over the unknown world. So we know it and we understand it or control it, right? It's interesting that so many stories of creation, they have that knowing component to it, right? The Genesis, for instance, Frankenstein, of course, and that knowing is dangerous, painful. It leads to a downfall, right? In the staging, the National Theatre staging that I referred to, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, right, over the stage. And every now and then, when the creature opens his eyes, when the creature has learned something, they flash. But they are so strong, and the surroundings are so dark that that light, the light of knowledge, blinds and hurts, right? The quest for identity is rewarding, eye-opening, and painful. And Jane said that it's interesting that so many works keep asking that question. And yes, they do, right? And they don't stop asking the question because there is no one answer to it, right? The creature learns, grows, learns to ask questions, evolves, changes, and so does Victor. They are always changing. What happens when it stops? I don't want to know.
Thank you.
Theresia, you're muted.
My dog is barking. So both of you referred to Mary Wollstonecraft, who it is the case that she died in childbirth. And Jane, when your mother was dying, you made mirrors that didn't have the reflection, okay? And so I wonder if you could talk about, I mean, in my knowledge, which is very limited, the only two creatures that were created by a man solely are Adam, maybe Eve, and we're not very clear there, and Frankenstein the monster. And I wonder how much, I don't think anybody escapes maternity, you know, and does anything have to do with the fact that these are motherless creatures and therefore monstrous? And if you think about, you know, the great first mirror of any baby is the mother's face, and that's missing from both these creatures. I wonder if you had comments about that, because it seems to me linked to your talks.
Yeah. I'll say quickly a couple of words. In the novel and in the circumstances of the novel Frankenstein, all mothers die. Mothers do appear to die, right? Victor's mother dies and he has nightmares about it. Of course, lurking in the background of the novel itself, there is Mary Shelley's dead mother, right? And the scenario in which she sees herself as responsible for it. The monster, the creature, misses a father, right, and demands of Victor that Victor be the father, right, that he lacks. The creature never mentions a mother, and the fact that it doesn't mention a mother when, as you said, all births go through the mother is telling, I think, by its absence, as if it was a silence that hurts, right? Again, all the mothers that surround this novel, they're in the novel, they are dead. The novel was written by a woman, right? In an age when women were claiming the rights that were in theory the rights of all people. In practice was different. That said, in certain mythical narratives, in religious narratives, the father figure is overwhelming, right? The mother figure is there, but but it seems not to play a creative role, right? It plays a different role, a comforting role, perhaps.
But
right?
would that be the substitution of something else? I mean,
Right.
it's very interesting to me that if you read the Hebrew Bible, at least, God is an exacting father, and he does throw them out of paradise. And Victor is not going to play games with the monster after a while. It's not, he's not going to be daddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there is this need for that, but there's this big thing that is missing. And to me, it's always, just because women don't have economic or political power, or even show up much, they're very powerful. And so, I mean, who's the most important person in a child's life, for a long time? It's the mother. So I just wonder about that, because you both referred to that, and you have a death lurking in the back, and so does Jane in a funny way, I mean, a very profound personal way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know quite. I mean, I think your question and your observation, Teresia, is fascinating. And I don't know quite how to address it, other than just in a personal way. When I was, figuring out who I was as a creator, as an artist, and well, I did the degree in religion because I felt like my work was somehow interested in spirituality and looking at those questions, and I didn't really know enough, so I wanted to learn more. And when I found myself in this women's studies and religion class with some really amazing people, I decided, well, I'm going to start looking at these stories more carefully, because I didn't really, I grew up in a very liberal Protestant tradition. Those stories weren't really part of, the experience in a sacred space that I knew about. And I got a hold of a copy of a book called Texts of Terror by Phyllis Trabell. And I thought, oh, this doesn't sound so nice. And truly, every story in, it was all about the women's stories, and they were terror-filled. And I thought, well, I'm just going to work my way through this book. And I ended up, the first chapter was Hagar. And I spent years working on Hagar's story and feel like I could return to it now. It's really that sense of looking for the mother, I think, is also maybe a theme that runs, besides looking for home and looking for who we are. I mean, maybe if we found the mother, we would recognize that. And I can't help but then make that leap to Mother Earth, right? And that sense of, feeling more connected to our place on the planet.
Chris, go ahead. I think we have time for one more question. Chris, you're muted. Please go ahead and raise your question.
Okay. Well, thank you, Breno and Jane. That was great. I don't even know if I exactly have a question, but I don't know. I feel like I just wanted to report I feel like my brain got smoothied in a very cool way from all this talk of like mirrors and perception and refraction. And I don't know, Jane, it was really cool to see your work too. But yeah, like, I don't know, talking about like Frankenstein, I think it's interesting how like sometimes there's the misconception with people who haven't, how people think Frankenstein necessarily means the monster, but Frankenstein really kind of more refers to the doctor. Like, I think that related to what you're talking about, Breno. And I don't know, the way this whole week of discussions was framed with like society and all the stuff that the world has been going through and everything, I don't know, I'm somehow feeling this like optimistic surge coming from this talk of like the tendency to view people or neighbors or whatever elements within society as monstrous. It's like, yeah, okay, that can work maybe as a way to sort of target issues or things, to learn about yourself, about like what is unacceptable or acceptable. But ultimately, as Breno's talk went into, like, it seems like it's a fallacy, or it's not the complete picture. Like, nothing is completely inherently monstrous or beautifully originally human and whatever, like they're tied and they're just sort of different sides of the same thing. So I don't know, like it feels like there's this orb that feels like a mission that it should aspire to I don't know, to see these elements or these things that come up and might appear certain ways as like it all needs to be healed within the fabric of the stitched creature, which is humankind or whatever, in order for anything to work. I don't know. Not to get all wah, but yeah, thank you for the the talk. That I think that was really cool.
Thank you, Chris. Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to my last pair of slides, which Chris is reminding me maybe I didn't quite articulate what you were looking at with those two films. And Leith's film is called The Perfect Human, and it is almost narrated in this, you know, as if it was the zookeeper looking at these two, you know, beautiful specimens that are, you know, looking at their ear, looking at their knee, or, you know, watching them move. And if you go back and look at that now, you know, it looks like a contemporary Gap commercial, but of course it was made in 1967. And when Alex DeCourt reproduced that video, basically shot by shot, but instead constructing the Frankenstein monster, it's pretty amazing in terms of making that connection with what you're saying, Chris, because the monster at one point gets disappeared by like spray paint. The monster at one point is rolling around with a giant fork and a lot of like spaghetti. The monster is like that picture I showed where he's smushing like white bread in his face. It's a very humorous look at you know, when you get into Frankenstein, and some of those issues can be a rather kind of painful, you know, encounter, or a I don't know, a sort of poignant encounter. And so I think that it's really interesting to sort of think about how we see ourselves. And what I liked and what I thought about when you were talking about having a smoothie experience was just bringing that sense of humor into like the sort of ridiculousness of ourselves, right? Of who we are and what we do with our hairdos and how we go about our days and how we other ourselves and everyone else. And it's a good reminder, you know, to sort of to reflect again.
And let me just say, Chris, that the stitched together creature that you referred to, right? I think it's an apt metaphor for what society is like, right? We are all these parts, these isolated parts that come together somewhat haphazardly, not always so graciously, and yet despite this, all these parts, when they come together from all different places, right? All different, with all different functions, when they come together, they are able to animate the whole, right? Society is like that a little bit, right? Diverse, heterogeneous, incongruous, but it's able to animate the whole.
Very cool. Oh, Tariq, one last brief question.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Did I?
No, please go ahead.
So in the book, the monster, he sees a way to fix his situation. And there are two keywords that I found are interesting. One is he wants someone, a female in fact, but of his species. And the second keyword is the same kind of deformity. Mm-hmm. He does not need something, what he considers beautiful or anything, but he wants the same kind of deformed being. if you could comment on that, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated request because can you really speak? Can you really talk of a species when there is only one kind, one of a kind? Is that enough for us to generalize it into a species, right? That's one question. The other question that this raises is, what is his deformity? What exactly makes it a monster? Is it the stitches? Is it the freshness of the body parts that were put together? Is it the fact that he's 8 feet tall and probably has a gait when he walks? The novel never specifies any of this, right? So we don't know. Maybe he knows, maybe Victor knows, but we don't. So in a sense, for us, the readers, that request seems doomed to failure, right? The tragedy is already announced.
And I'll just say that I love Mel Brooks' answer to that. If then that's just a prompt for all my students to watch Young Frankenstein.
Oh, it's a tease.
Yes. Yes, there is, yeah.
It's interesting that there's a big studies of aberrant children, you know, deaf children, blind children, so forth. And the one that's very moving to me in this section is that there are lots of deaf parents, or I think there's a more politically correct way of saying that these days, but who want their own children to be deaf as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That they really don't want to encourage them to hear. And that sounds very cruel, but that to Tariku's point, that you want someone who's like you.
Yeah.
And that therefore a different world opens up and that you would understand them better. It's just aside, but you know.
Yeah, I wonder if that's the solution or if that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much. So we don't want to abuse of your time. We know that you have complicated agendas. I would like to remind you, tomorrow we are wrapping up with a celebration. Come and celebrate your monstrosities with us. And we're gonna have a panel with Carla, which I think she's somewhere around, Carla Marco Antonio and myself, and we will be screening live Akira, which is a classical Japanese film. You want to see it in the big screen. We're gonna have a live reception. We're gonna have drinks and goodies to pass around for the upcoming Halloween. There's Carla. And please come and celebrate with us tomorrow at 6:45. We're starting the reception in the School of Film and TV in front of the Mayer Theater. Carla, any last words?
My last words is watch the films, watch the Spotlight films. They're great. I've been having fun. You know, we picked the films, everybody picked the film. And one of the fun things for me that I will be sharing with you tomorrow is to see the connections between all the films that we picked for the Spotlight. So please watch at least a couple of them before tomorrow if you haven't already.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good night.